And welcome to the last chapter of web application development, e-commerce. We're looking at chapter 12, planning for success. So what are we going to look at today? Well, we're going to do a quick review of everything that we've covered throughout the entire book. And obviously we don't have a lot of time for that, so it'll be a super fast review. And then we'll dig into chapter 12. And chapter 12 deals with web systems analysis and design, specifically looking at, so it's basically, this is a subset of the entirety of systems analysis and design. Specifically, what are the major issues that are relevant for on the web? And we're not going to give you an entire analysis and design class in 1 hour. We can. So obviously, we just look at the big things that matter for this context. All right. So let's start with the review. So what have we talked about this semester? Well, we started with a good internet foundation, understanding how the internet works, where its history is, what's HTTP, what's HTML, how do web pages work. Okay. We talked about on that foundation we have web servers, and on those web servers such as IIS or Apache, that we create a place for people to go to find web pages. And those web pages, when you put them together, create an entire website. Now, a lot of what this class is about is how do we build that website. So that's a lot of the technology, HTML and PHP, that we've been looking at. Well, what does a website do? Well, a lot of times, and especially in e-commerce terms, we have to develop a web presence in order to gather revenue sources and put together some advanced technologies. And all of that is to support our marketing and business-to-business transactions. Now, the entirety of this happens within a legal and ethical environment, as we've talked about. And so where does this put us now? Well, when we get into analysis and design, we want to basically take a look and understand what's going on, what's the environment, what is the current business, and where does it want to go. We have to understand the business needs and the business problems. We also have to understand the current process, and if the process is going to change, how is it going to change? And from that, we can design a solution. Now, by design, we don't necessarily mean web design, because web design, if you remember, deals more with the prettiness of a site. So the pictures, the color schemes, the layouts. And that's not what we mean here by design. What we mean by design is how do we design the business process using web technologies? Okay, and all internet technologies. Let's go a little bit broader. So you have the internet foundation, and that can include things like email and instant messaging and voice over IP. All that can be included in your design solution. Okay, so now we got at least a picture of what we're going to look at, and we're specifically looking at this environment, the web environment, and the various legal and ethical issues that involve in that. So let's start with a problem that happened a few years ago, but really articulates why analysis and design is so incredibly important in the web environment. And we're going to look at 1998. So it's a few years old, but I think it's very instructive about why this can run into a problem. Now, Toys R Us in 1998 decided to launch ToysRUs.com. And this was right at the very beginning, the cusp of the internet bubble, or some people call it the internet boom. E-commerce was just taking off, and everyone was talking about it. So Toys R Us was like, well, we need to get on this. We need to develop our own website so we can sell our products online. And so they did. After advertising $10 discounts and free shipping, online orders shot up tenfold during the 1999 Christmas season. So they've had to sign up for an entire year. All right. And we see that 39 million out of the total 49 million, that revenue from the website came during the Christmas season. So if you want to do the math on that, it's approximately 80%. 80% of the revenue came in 1.5 months. Okay, and it's because of these great offers they had. Now, what's the problem? You'd think this is great. They have their breakout season, their breakout of their website to really successfully do stuff, right? Well, the problem was their logistics could not keep up. They actually, by Christmas morning of 1999, 5% of all orders were left unfulfilled. Now think about that. You got little Tommy and little Tara and Susie sitting around the Christmas tree without their presents. You know how many really, really pissed off parents there were? Speaking as a parent myself, I could say if I did not get my order by Christmas when it was promised. So these people most of the people that went to the Toys R Us site saw that they would be promised that the item would be shipped by Christmas morning, and it did not come in that time. So 5% of all orders were not fulfilled. And that is a lot of really pissed off people. Okay, it was a major failure on Toys R Us part. Okay, you don't want. Let me put this in terms you can understand. If you pissed off 5% of your customers, it's not so much just that 5% that's going to be the problem. Those 5%, so 1 out of 20 people, is going to complain to the other 19 and tell them about their horrible experience. And they'll basically say, you got lucky. I got screwed. And I don't think you should ever buy from them again because you just got lucky this one time. What happens next year when they screw everybody over? You might be that you might be that 5%. Okay, so bad press like this can really kill a business. And Toys R Us recognized that. And they knew they had to fix it. All right, so this was a huge catastrophe for them. What did they do? Well, Toys R Us realized that their logistics was not sufficient for handling the problem. They actually decided after 1999 Christmas season to outsource everything to Amazon.com and let them handle the logistics. So the website, Toys R Us still had the product lineup, but they used Amazon.com's warehouses. They used their web system. And they just took a little bit of money off the top. And it actually happened to be very little. Toys R Us basically supplied the products to Amazon, and Amazon shipped them. And that's essentially what it boiled down to in the end. Although that relationship eventually broke off, Amazon and Toys R Us had a parting of ways, and not too happily. But this was what, in 2000, that's what Toys R Us had to do. And so for a while, all the toys on Amazon.com were Toys R Us toys. And at least for a couple of years, I think that was true. So Toys R Us.com was to buy and manage the inventory. Amazon would oversee the site development, order fulfillment, and customer service. And like I said, that lasted for a number of years. But this is the problem with online things. And it's easy to say, let's just put up a website and let's try to get as much traffic as we can. There was a commercial that came out, I think it was around 2005 or 2006, that hammered on the same problem. And it was this fictitious company who had put this ad out at the Super Bowl, and they were excited when they started watching the orders coming in. So for the first, it went up 1 to 10 to 10 to 50 to 100, and before they know it, to see 1,000, and then before they know it, it says 10,000, and all the people suddenly start looking around like, oh, son of a, how the hell are we going to fulfill all these orders? And that can be a major problem. Then likewise, now there's so many companies out there that the opposite problem is, how do you get noticed? Sure, back then it was easy to get noticed when there weren't as many companies around. Now it's much more difficult to even get noticed. So there's a lot of problems here, and all these have to do with analysis and design. If you don't fully understand your business and the business problems, it's gonna lead you to disaster. All right, so let's go back to analysis and design. Now, some of you may have had this class, some of you may not have. What we're going to talk about, when you do analysis and design, it always starts with what are your objectives or the business strategies. How does this web solution achieve your business objectives? And that should always be your first question. Okay? What are our business objectives, and how does this solution help us do that? Now, there's a temptation is to say, well, everybody has a web presence. We need a web presence. But that's just answering what do other people want. It doesn't answer what you need. What are your business objectives? Is it to be just like everybody else? Because if you're just like everybody else, what differentiates you from them? And how does that help you as a company? Right? Once you've understand that question clearly, the next one is, why should we build the web solution? And that's where the system request is. So the system request answers this question. Why should we build the web solution? We know our objectives, but that must mean we're not there now. Okay, so what's the difference between where we're at now and where we want to be? And how does a web solution help us get there? But just defining that difference doesn't mean that this is something we should do right now or in the way that we may first envision it. So what do we really need? We need to analyze by first starting with what's called a feasibility analysis. Okay, does this web solution make economic sense? Do we have the technology to support a web solution? Will people actually use it? Right? And so we'll look at some more of these in detail as well. Then you get into planning. Right? So once we understand what we want and we're sure that this is the best solution, we have to figure out the steps to get there. And that includes what specific requirements are necessary to ensure successful accomplishment of the objectives. Okay? So planning and analysis often go hand in hand. You have to analyze the solution to figure out what we need to do, but you also need to be planning. Let me pause there. Okay, so we have to have an analysis of what is necessary to ensure that we accomplish our objectives. But we also have to know what needs to be analyzed and in what order and how do we put that all together. All right. Once we have a really clear idea of the requirements, and even if you don't have a real clear idea of the requirements, you go work into design. Now, there's different ways to approach the relationship between analysis and design. And in the traditional, the waterfall method or the traditional analysis and design methodology, you do analysis first and then you do design. Now, that doesn't always work because sometimes the requirements aren't always clear. So, for example, if they tell you, well, we just need some sort of web presence. We don't know what exactly we need, but let's put something up, some website up. Well, you might get started and say, well, okay, those requirements aren't nearly defined enough. But here's a basic website. What can we do to make this better? Okay, so you create an initial design, and then you come back and say, okay, this is where we're at, but let's keep adding to it and define requirements better. Okay, and as you go, the solution develops. And after all that, you have to get into the maintenance mode. So you got to keep interacting with the site to continually build, and especially in the web world, if something is out of date, it looks really bad. Okay, most people really cannot stand having old, out-of-date websites. Let me rephrase that. Most people cannot stand visiting out-of-date websites. Okay. Plus, some web pages are up, or sometimes people change the names of pages, and if you have links to those pages, suddenly that link will be broken. You need to fix those. Okay. You need to come in and continually monitor what's going on in your site. You need to update the graphics when better graphics are available. Update the features as more features come available. To be able to integrate with Facebook or Twitter, to be able to post images or to show YouTube videos. Right? All these capabilities are out there, but the fact of the matter is you want to have something continually evolving and developing and becoming better. All right, so let's break it down a little bit. What's the economic feasibility? In particular, what are the benefits? So for a web solution, probably one of the biggest benefits is the expanded market. Okay, if you are a local business, and by local it can be in the city, it could be in the state, or even this country could be your current market. But you go online and suddenly your market's the entire world. It doesn't matter if you're right now currently located in Greenville, North Carolina. You put a website up and suddenly you have a worldwide market because everybody can access it. Another benefit is that you can build your brand better. Okay, so who you are, you can define that far more articulately. Is that a word? Articulately? I'm not saying it very articulately. But you need to be able to build your brand, and you can do that better when you have a website because people can now find out more about you and get a clearer understanding of who and what you stand for as a business. It's very easy to enhance your marketing programs. And I'm not just talking about email marketing, but you can now integrate what you're doing in multiple different ways. So if you want to put a sale up, well, you can put the sale not only on your signs in your shop, but you can also put it up on your website, or maybe even have special offers for your online customers. Or you can integrate it with Facebook, so that way people coming from Facebook, the ads are seen on Facebook as well as on your site, as well as on your store. So now you have multiple people all seeing the same marketing campaign at the same time. You can improve customer service tremendously. So you could, have the facilities to having frequently asked questions, so people can quickly come and read and find out about those things that you generally get the most questions about. Okay, so here's an example of someone who basically took their website, took their customer support, and took one of their biggest questions in customer support, turned it into a website, and suddenly started winning awards for customer service. What did they do? This company is FedEx. And what they did is one of the biggest questions people would call about were, where's my package? So what did FedEx do for the solution? They said, here's your ID number, your tracking ID, and you want to know? Here's a website. You type in the ID, the tracking number, and bam, it'll tell you exactly where your package is. Now, it used to be that their customer service representatives had this information on their computers. All FedEx did was say, let's just turn it around. So not only can our customer service people see it, but anybody who has the right tracking number can see it. And people loved it because they didn't have to call customer support, which usually would take 5 minutes or 10 minutes rather than going to a website, typing it in, and only taking 1 minute. It was really, really a big boon for them. I mean, yeah, they spent money to build this web application, but they actually made their customers happier, and they received less calls into the customer support center and saving them money. So, which gets to the next one, which was reduce cost of after-sale support. Okay, when you give them the capabilities to, download the manual. I do this all the time. I'm working around the house and I'm like, gosh, I got this tool and I can't remember how to work it. I'm going to go online and see if I can find the manual. And then I download the manual and or print it out if I need to, or at least look at it online, and I can find out how to work the thing. I don't need to call anybody to figure out how it works. I don't need to go ask somebody. It's all right there for me to figure out on my own. You can improve your supply chain operation. And we talked a lot about how we can use supply chain management in an earlier chapter. What was that, chapter 5-ish? Where we talked about how web applications can facilitate the supply chain operation. We can even have access inventory. Well, what are we going to do with that? Okay, now there used to be ways you could get rid of it. You could have big sales, but you can also auction it off. You got too much stuff. Well, what's nice about an auction is many times the products are going to go for more than what you might have been able to sell it for if you had it on sale. Okay, and you got a bigger audience if you do an online auction. Pretty nice, right? All right, so what are some of the major costs of web solutions? Now, keep in mind that these costs, generally speaking, tend to be fairly on the low side, considering about from the benefits. Not always, but generally are. But where are some of the costs? Well, first you have to be able to purchase web development software and software modules. Okay, do you own Dreamweaver, Adobe Dreamweaver, or Microsoft Expression Web, or Microsoft Visual Studio? Even if you have WordPress, you might need one of the plugins that you have to pay for, okay, or a template that you pay for, and that's okay if you have to pay for them, but do it and use them right. You have to have web hosting costs, okay, and these can be fairly low, but they can also run into hundreds of dollars a month if you have high-end solutions. If you're using software as a service or any other cloud computing services, those can be cost. You have to hire personnel to create the website, write the content, customize the software, and maintain the website. Now, that being said, there are ways, especially if you're a small business, where you can do a lot of that either for a very minimal price or without paying for anyone at all. But most larger organizations, though, you need to hire personnel to do all these things. You can't just expect content to be magically written. You need to assign somebody to do it, and that means if they're not already busy, if they are busy, you got to hire somebody else to do it. If they're not busy, well, they're not being utilized fully anyway, so great. And now you got more work for them. But you got to write content, customize the software, all that stuff. All right. So that's kind of the economic feasibility, the big issues. What about cultural feasibility? And this takes on a bigger piece because the web is not as easy to use as a lot of people like to pretend it is. Now, a lot of people are on the web, and a lot of web pages are easy to access and use. But that also comes because a lot of people are familiar with a lot of similar designs, and a lot of the designs are similar. But a big question is, will people use the web solution? You can't just assume that because you build it, people are going to come. They may not. What is the profile of your expected users? Because that's going to have a big impact as well of how you build your web application. Are they mostly, let's say, seniors? Okay. If you do have that audience, what are they coming to your site for? How many of them actually would go to your site? They may not want to. They may, a lot of seniors might know a little bit about web technologies, but a lot of them just aren't that comfortable getting on the web. Okay, so what are your expectations here? If their general profile is someone who maybe doesn't want to get on the web, or maybe doesn't want to get on the web for this purpose, then are you really getting the bang for the buck out of it? How much do they use the technology you propose? Now, when I say that, keep in mind, I'm not talking about basic web page. Okay, that, yes, it's very easy for them to use that technology. But I'm talking about a little more sophisticated things. So let's say a message board, or maybe a group application, so like Google Groups or Facebook Groups. How much do the people use that technology that you propose? And we'll talk about an example here in a minute where that was an issue. How inclusive does your solution need to be? In other words, do you need to include 100% of the people? 80% of the people? Or are you just trying to reach a few more than you currently have access to? So maybe it's only 5%, but 5% is okay. You don't need to reach everybody, just those people who maybe are more sophisticated. Also consider that there might be multiple channels for communication. So there might be multiple ways that you can achieve the same solution. And you have to basically discover what's the best one, right? You have to decide, do we want to use social networks or not? You may not always want to. Just because a lot of businesses have Facebook pages doesn't mean all businesses should have a Facebook page or all businesses should have a Twitter account. Another big issue is trust, okay? And when it comes especially to cultural feasibility, there's a fair wide range in the amount of trust people give to websites or to any business in general, much less a business online. So one of your immediate goals should be try to develop that trust, but culturally sometimes there's barriers there that you have to try to overcome. All right, so now we looked at some of the feasibility, at least the big feasibility issues. So let's move on from that and start talking about how can we what are some of the other issues when it comes to requirements. And a big one is, where is our website going to be hosted? Okay, now we talked about in a previous chapter some of those different options, from the do-it-yourself web hosting where you have the server in-house in your business and you do everything, all the way up to basically a virtual website. So something like using Google Sites to create your website and use it. So when trying to decide your web hosting, there's the big things you need to consider. Number one is the functionality that you need. And the more functionality you need, the more you're going to have to do yourself. You also have to decide the reliability. Now, there's a lot of good web hosting companies out there. Not all of them will promise 99.99% reliability. You have to truly dig in and find out, what is the reliability? How much can I depend upon them? And another consideration is the scalability. So yes, you might be able to buy a cheap package that gets your website up now. But if you have plans for rapid growth, then your website should also be in a solution that can handle rapid growth. And if it can't, in other words, can you make upgrades to your account? Or can you make upgrades to your server? Can you increase the bandwidth? And how much will it cost to do all that? Security. Okay. In particular, how secure is their operations? How secure is their hosting facility? Do they have a server farm? And if so, are there physical security? What is their software security? Do they have firewalls? What type of firewalls? What ports do they leave open? How do they monitor their networks? All this information needs to be discovered and used. You also have to look into, do they do any backup and recovery? Okay. Some web hosting solutions, one of the reasons why they keep it cheap is because they don't do any backup for you. So that is something you need to look into and take into consideration. Other ones, though, especially the ones that cost more, will do a periodic backup. They do have the capabilities for a full recovery, or at least a partial recovery. So look into those options. And one thing that I think the book really misses out on is this overall support. Can you call and get a hold of somebody when you have a problem? Or email? Do they respond quickly, or do they take a long time? What level, if you're having issues, how quickly do they escalate the problem? What's their escalation procedure? So these are all big things in supporting the hosting that needs to be looked at. And lastly, of course, cost. So basically, is it worth it? All these other things to consider, is it worth the cost? So let's take a look at one example here. Suppose you are asked by the author of a best-selling book on career goal setting to build a website to market his book. He says he doesn't have a lot of technical knowledge and needs your help in designing a solution that will best accomplish his goal of selling the book. where do you start? What questions would you ask him to establish requirements? So if you can, jot down a few answers right now. What are some of the things that you would want to know about him? Okay, so you already know he's an author. His subject area is career goal setting. So who would be his target audience? Might be a good first question. Probably goal setting or career goal setting, you're talking about business professionals. But you want to clarify that. Is that really what he's looking for? Or maybe it's more geared towards students. Okay, people who are just beginning their career, or is this more midterm career people? Another question. What is this website supposed to accomplish? Are you going to include a shopping cart to buy the book directly on this site? Are you going to be linking to other sites like Amazon or Barnes & Noble? Are you going to, how exactly is that, the solution there, okay? The solution to marketing question, okay? Or the revenue question. Where is it going to be accomplished? Another one would be, what types of information do you want to display? So usually you would expect there to be information about the book. Maybe there is information about the author. Usually there is. Why is he an expert in this area? Does he want to have a blog? Does he have plans to keep the blog ongoing? How easy is it for him to write content for the blog? Does he want to create a community of professionals to come and discuss their career goals? And if so, what type of community? Does he want to use a social network to facilitate that discussion, or does he want to use a message board that he can control more? What about if he does create a message board? How is he going to manage the boards? What happens if some people get on there and start posting things that are just not acceptable? How is he going to handle that? So these are all very important questions to ask when you establish these requirements. So think also about how can you use the marketing ideas you've learned early in the semester to help promote the book. So all this can be part of the solution. And so he may have a list of requirements, but you hopefully have an understanding of web technologies that can even take his requirements a step up. You can make suggestions to him and say, well, I see you want to do this, this, and this. Have you thought about this as well? Maybe he has, maybe he hasn't. Maybe you can convince them that this extra thing is more beneficial than he originally realized. Okay? Maybe promoting his blog on Facebook is a lot easier than he had thought. Maybe he thought it would take a lot of work, and it really doesn't. You can have it completely automated so that when he posts a blog post, it automatically sends a link to his profile on Facebook and on Twitter and on LinkedIn. So once these are all pushed out like that, people can easily click and see what he's writing about. Okay. So that's a big thing you can start looking at here. It's not just realizing what he knows and his requirements, but because the web has so many new technologies out there, there's so many different ways you can add value to your clients if you know what's going on. So now think about what steps, let me rephrase that. I think that's a slight misspelling there. What steps might you take in planning the project outline? Again, what steps might you take in planning the project outline? Well, how would you move forward here? What considerations are important to plan out the project? So maybe one of the first things you need to decide is, what's the budget? Okay, and that probably comes out of the requirements stage. But from that budget, you can decide, okay, we have, let's say, $1,000. I'm going to spend, $500 building content, or maybe $500 finding the right solution, $200 for work, and then maybe another $300 for marketing. But then you can start breaking things out and deciding what order things are going to happen in. Right? All right, let's take another example. Suppose you're building a website for your kid's school, and they want a digital group created for the parents group. And this is something I actually had to do recently, so it's kind of fresh on my mind. What questions would you ask to establish requirements? So again, jot down a few things here. And if you need to pause this video while you do it, please do so. What questions would you ask to establish requirements? So some of the things I started asking when I first thought of this question was, well, what type of group applications are out there? Okay, I heard somebody mention Facebook groups, and I heard another person mention Google groups. You might even say you could use a message board. Do they want to develop this group and have complete control over the application, or are they willing to use a third party like Google or Facebook to run the groups? Another question might be, well, what is this group going to be doing? Are they going to be sharing pictures and files? Are they going to be is there a need for high security? Now, this is for a kid's school, so you might think there needs to be some security into that. Another question might be, how many parents are on Facebook or have a Google account? Because there's still a fair number of parents that don't have a Facebook accounts, and even among students, like in college students, I find that about 5 to 10% don't have a Facebook account at all. And then there's probably a bunch of other ones who have accounts that don't really use it very often. So if you post something on those groups, how many people actually see it and read it? So these are all very important questions to ask when you're establishing these requirements. Okay. So types of cultural issues you take into account. In this case, a big one is, are the parents savvy enough to use something like a Facebook group? And what do you do about inclusiveness? So in this case, you have a parents group. You want to make it available to all parents. Well, luckily, Facebook is free to use. And what if some of the parents don't want to be on Facebook? Well, this is probably more of an educational issue. Is they can be on Facebook and not share anything personally and just use the group. Okay, that's definitely possible. So if you educate them on that, they can realize that, well, just because you have a Facebook account doesn't mean you're sharing information. They can get past some of these cultural issues, where they don't want to be on Facebook, or they see it as a big invasion of privacy. That can be something that's overcome, right? Although there might be a group of people that might just say, well, anything I put online I don't want to put anything online ever. And well, you can't really get past that too much, especially if you want to have a digital group. And so sometimes you can't get 100% inclusiveness. You just got to take that all into consideration, though. All right, how could you address these cultural issues? So one thing, like I said, the people who may not be on Facebook would be, we can educate them. Educate them on how you can use Facebook without, being rude or condescending, but show them that, hey, guess what? Even if you don't want to be one of those people that shares their minute-by-minute updates of everything going on in their life, you can be on Facebook without doing all that. And you can actually use a lot of these features without sharing any personal information. Just join this private group. Don't do anything else. That's it. And it's very similar to like Google groups, okay? If you get on Google groups, you have to create a Google account. Just because you create a Google account doesn't mean you have to use all the other features that Google has available. All right. Well, so those are the types of things you need to talk about, okay? Now, in this case, what we ended up doing, for my own kid's school, we actually did end up creating a Facebook group. I haven't heard any complaints from that, so I'm assuming it turned out pretty well. But then again, maybe that might be because some people don't even know about it. I don't know. Maybe they would complain if they did. So at any rate, those are all very important issues to take in consideration. All right, so let's turn to planning for development. So here we have to look at a lot of, and these are questions that are really kind of true of a lot of development projects. But do you want to do outsourcing, or do you want to look at an internal team? And maybe do you have an internal team? Do you want to hire an internal team to do it? Or do you just want to outsource this to a consultant or even overseas? You certainly don't have to. There's a lot of local people who can develop websites too. And even if you outsource, doesn't mean you have to outsource the entire project. You could outsource early parts of the development, middle parts of the development, or even late parts of the development, depending on how things are going and what type of technical skills you need. And that gets into the next one. What skills do you need? A big thing about outsourcing is maybe you even bring in one or two skilled people, but you also have some internal people working together with these outsourced people. And then there's some ethical considerations like who can you trust, particularly when you get into intellectual property issues. So you get some institutions like a financial planning company, that is a major issue. So I had a good friend who worked at, it was A.G. Edwards until they got bought out by Wachovia Bank, and until Wachovia got bought out by Wells Fargo. So I ended up working at Wells Fargo. But one of his jobs was working on their web technologies, and particularly he helped develop some of the web solutions for their financial planners or financial consultants. And so they have their internal systems, and they had an older technology, and I don't know what it was at the time, but they were moving to a web technology. And so his job was to do all that. Now, is this a feasible place for an outsourcing? Probably not, because they're dealing with a lot of money. They really don't want to outsource this because they don't want anybody else to know anything about how to access that large volumes of money. And so this was more of a intellectual property ownership issue. And it's not that they necessarily trust a lot of different consultants in general. It's just that in particular for their company, it just wasn't right. And so actually a lot of banks and financial institutions have large IT departments because of that, because they have to have an internal team to do it. All right, other things to consider for development. Well, it's particularly in the web development arena, there are different ways of going about creating web companies. So there's startups, spin-offs, and new developments can consider things called incubators and fast venturing. What are those two? Well, an incubator, let me start with that one. An incubator is essentially a facility created specifically for helping a business to grow. Now, you can have IT incubators, and a lot of these are IT incubators, but they don't have to be. They will provide you, this little facility will provide you with some, financial support. It'll provide you with some professionals like an accountant or a lawyer that small companies simply have troubles to afford in their new development if they have to do it all on their own. Well, an incubator will take good ideas, they'll incubate it in these development facilities with special support around them to help them grow their product or their company quickly. And from that incubation period, they come up with, hopefully, quality businesses. Now, some of these incubators can actually be internal incubators to some larger companies. So maybe a large company will create internal incubators for creating new products. Sometimes they will be local to a community. So like in the Greenville area, there is a local incubator for new businesses. All right, what is fast venturing? All right, so this is a term that even I'm not as familiar with, but the book does bring it up and talk about it a bit. But it's the concept of how do you create a business very quickly and putting together all these pieces. Now, generally, it takes outside support to get there. It tends to be more for spin-offs from companies, but you're creating this business through venture partnerships. So basically, you're looking at two different businesses. They create a joint venture to quickly create the product that they need and launch it into the world. Okay, so you try to get the support from the two key players to build and launch quickly. Okay, and these are really becoming popular in web development projects, incubators, and fast venturing, because there is so much potential for growth quickly without a lot of the bureaucracy to get in the way. Okay, the less bureaucracy you have, the quicker you can get these products up off the ground and running. And a lot of times with web technologies, being the first one on the market is very, very important in order to be successful. And so you want to try to get all the support you can to launch these, and there tends to be more money in doing that. Okay, if you can get it out fast and developed well. All right, let's move on to managing, which is, as you might know, deals with project management. Now, generally speaking, it still has a lot of the same issues in project management that every other project has. You can have deliverables, tasks, risks, issues, changes, staffing issues, scheduling issues, costs, and more. Okay. One of the big differences with web technologies is that it tends to have very quick release cycles. In other words, instead of having, like Microsoft comes out with a new OS every 3 to 5 years, right? In web world, you might have an update to your website every week. Now, there might be small updates, and there are big updates. The bigger the update, you might take a month between major updates. But generally speaking, they don't take very long. You want to keep pushing forward. Again, this gets into the first mover advantage. The sooner you can get out there, get people to your site and developing basically the snowball effect of growing and strengthening your site, the better chance you have at success. So the quicker you can release things, even if it fails at first, you have more chance of coming and fixing it quickly and keep moving forward. And you can also get into whole project portfolio management issues. So you can look at a series of web applications and how they all interact with each other, and build that all on that. And I'm not going to get into a whole lot of details, but essentially that is the next level up. So who's all involved with this? And now you can see from this list, a lot of people can be involved. Now, not everyone is always involved. But especially in larger businesses, you're going to have a large number of these that are, and some of them only have small roles to play. So like network operators, systems administrators, database administrators may all have very small roles to play. Whereas the web programmers and web designers, obviously, are going to have a large amount of stuff to do. Okay, the content creators, the social networking administrators, they're constantly interacting, but they all have specific roles. Now, I don't have time to talk about all these roles here in the lecture. I refer you to the book to read up on those. But the big things, you're going to have some sort of web programmer. Usually there's a differentiation between the programmers and the designers, the graphic designers. You're going to also usually end up with a third, content creators. Okay, those three are almost essential. You're going to need some sort of project manager. And sometimes this rolls up into the CIO, does some of the project management in this really smaller businesses. In the larger businesses, they're going to have more of a breakout. You can have account managers, application specialists, and so on. But then you also have to be able to communicate with all these other roles. Okay. So that's about it. Okay, so that in the terms of what goes on in the web world, you can see that systems analysis and design concepts are still very necessary right from the start. And there are some various different strategies for development that can align the objectives with project needs. It tends to have a very fast turnover rate as far as release cycles. And there's some specific things you have to take in consideration for web technologies that you don't necessarily have to in all analysis and design projects. But managing a web project can be a complex interconnection of staffing, cost, schedule, and work. And working that out and figuring that out is very, very important to have successful web solutions. So hopefully a little bit of this class today has shown you how to start putting together these pieces. Looking at how can we take and understand the internet foundation and the web server, website, looking at how do we create a web presence, how do we gather revenue, what are we trying to accomplish on the marketing or B2B side, and all the ethical and staffing and legal issues all kind of come together when we do this analysis and design. And with that, we are done.